Allied commander Ferdinand Foch ordered the Germans to be pushed back from the Marne River. The Germans, realizing the position they were in, had to withdraw from their positions. By August, the Americans were now ready for war. Germany's worst nightmare had come true. Now they had to contend with all three allies on the Western Front. The French wanted to use American troops to support the flanks and resupply the allies when needed, but commander of the American Expeditionary Force, John J. Pershing, wanted the US to act as an independent entity. They had their first solo offensive with some French support, back in May, when they attacked the village of Cantigny, taking from the German defenders with a creeping barrage, moving 100 meters every 2 minutes. Along with the support from the French tanks, the village was taken in 30 minutes by the Americans. Now Pershing was preparing to attack the Saint-Mihiel, and then eventually the much contested Meuse-Argonne region, which the French had been fighting over since the start of the war. The Allies had a total force of about 7 million men, and the Germans had a mere 3 million defending the Western Front. The attack on Amiens would be the launch point for the Great Allied Counteroffensive, known as the 100 Days Offensive. The 1918 Summer Battle of Amiens was dealt with the utmost secrecy. There was no preliminary bombardment to alert the Germans that an attack was commencing until it was too late. The elements of surprise was vital for this operation. It would be conducted with 10 British divisions, 5 Australian divisions, and all 4 Canadian divisions. Support from 1 American division would also be added, as well as 2,000 aircrafts and 532 tanks. World War I had truly become a modern war. Now armies were using combined arm tactics where infantry, aircraft, armored vehicles, and artillery all worked in unison to capture an objective, as opposed to men just running at machine guns with no support, other than the preliminary bombardment that did little to actually neutralize the enemy. All the carnage, blood loss, and stalemate that the powers of Europe had been struggling with, all the lessons and tactics that were learned over the course of this titanic war, had all culminated to this very battle at Amiens. The Allies wanted to keep the use of tanks a secret in this offensive, so they had planes fly up and down the front line to mask the engine of the tanks being moved for the attack. The Canadian movement to Amiens was kept a secret as well. The dominion of Canada's reputation more than preceded them, and the fact that all 4 Canadian divisions had to be secretly moved to Amiens speaks volumes. Whenever the Germans found the Canadian Corps coming into the line, they prepared for the worst. David Lloyd George, British Prime Minister. 2 small infantry battalions were sent near Ypres to trick the Germans into thinking the Canadians were attacking there. The British made small attacks along the Lys River to gain some strategic positions, but also to distract from the Amiens sector. The Allies moved massive forces at night and small groups during the day, whilst making small attacks throughout the front to disguise where the major attacks would be. The battle began on August 8, 1918 at 4:20 am under a dense fog, with the first phase attacking with 7 divisions, the British 18th and 58th, the Australian 2nd and 3rd, and the Canadians 1st, 2nd, and 3rd divisions. The attack was completely unexpected by the Germans, who did not respond with artillery until 5 minutes after they had been shelled. But when the Germans fired back at the Allied lines, they had already moved on and were headed straight for the Germans. The Canadians and Australians were at the forefront of the attack, and by 11:00 am they had pushed the line 4.8 kilometers from the starting point. The Allies took 75,000 prisoners and sustained 8,000 casualties on the 8th of August. Erich Ludendorff described the loss as the Black Day of the German army, due to how badly German morale had plunged, as evidenced by the large number of troops surrendering. The British army gained 3.2 kilometers of ground that day, the French army 8 kilometers, the Australians 11 kilometers, and the Canadians secured the most ground with 13 kilometers. The attack continued the next day with less than spectacular results. The tank force was greatly diminished, and the British and Americans were having trouble securing the Somme region, which was also part of the attack. An Australian unit using German stormtrooper-like tactics would eventually take the British objective. However, the infantry push had outrun their supply lines, and the attack would have to be called off by Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, who believed that if he continued, the unsupplied allies would become easy pickings for the German defenders. So for the first time in the war, Haig decided to call off an offensive while he was in a position of strength. Allied commander Ferdinand Foch wanted Haig to press on, but Haig insisted that his army stay put and attack again when everyone could be resupplied and all caught up together, which was the correct decision. The sins of the previous 3 years would not be repeated. The 1918 Battle of Amiens would come to an end on the 12th of August, was a huge turning point for the Allies. The Canadians, Anzacs, Indians, South Africans, and Caribbeans continued to carve out a path of independence through their more than exceptional contributions to this war. The British and French, with the help from their new ally, the United States, were working together and using their technology and industrial might in unison to put the Hun on the run. The next phase of the Allied offensive was to attack the massive defense network the Germans had been building, stretching from Arras to Soissons, known as the Hindenburg Line. In no man's land, you had the shelling zone, followed by anti-tank ditches. Next would be a series of machine gun nests housed in pillboxes. In between the nests, there was barbed wire designed to funnel troops into killing zones. Behind that, you had ground for a counterattack, and the first line trench system, and then second and third line trenches, followed by a reserve line, and then artillery behind them. This was the largest defense network defending the Germans on the Western Front, and the longer it stood, the longer Germany could remain in the war. All throughout the months of August and September, the Allies would focus their efforts on small attacks all along the Western Front, to wear down the Germans and keep them on the retreat and defensive. On September 2nd, the Canadians would attack the Drocourt-Queant line, sending the German defenders on the retreat, and finally opening the way to the Hindenburg Line. On September 12th, John J. Pershing would launch the attack on the Saint-Mihiel salient. The Americans were able to trick the Germans by sending fake documents detailing that an attack would be launched at Mulhouse. Thus, Germany would send most of their forces to that area. Once Germany depleted their troops in the Saint-Mihiel salient, the Americans attacked with 200,000 troops and moved on to their main objective, the Meuse-Argonne region. King Albert I of Belgium was now confident and decided to use his force to liberate Flanders. Canadian and British armies would attack the Canal du Nord on September 22nd, and the British and French would attack the Saint-Quentin Canal. Both these attacks were designed to breach the Hindenburg Line and open the way to Cambrai, a vital communication hub for the Germans. South of the front, the Americans' 1st and French 4th armies were attacking the Meuse River, and by October they were fighting the Germans in the massive forests of the Argonne, with over 1 million Americans taking part in this offensive, making it the largest battle the Americans ever fought up to this point. 2 Canadian divisions and an engineer crew were sent to build the bridges to cross the canal, because the only part that could be crossed with bridges were held by the Germans. The Canadians attacked in the morning at 5:20 a.m., and by the mid-morning all the defenders were killed, captured, or retreated. Now the road to Cambrai was open, and if Cambrai fell, then it could mean the collapse of the German army. On the 4th of October, the Germans had requested from the Allies for an armistice, and troops were ordered to retreat from the Hindenburg Line on the 8th. The next day, the Canadians had reached Cambrai, the much desired objective of the Allies on the Western Front. But much to the surprise of the Allies, the town was empty, as the Germans were ordered to retreat. During all of October, peace negotiations were being made, but the fighting had not stopped, as it would continue for almost a month, as the young men on the ground continued to die.